She thought her marriage was over. The vows were broken, the trust shattered, and her faith hanging by a thread. But what if the end of her story was actually the beginning of grace? This is the story of Mara and Luke, of promises broken, hearts mended, and a God who restores even what we think is beyond repair. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked louder than it should have, each second pounding through the quiet like a heartbeat that refused to settle. The air was still, heavy with the kind of silence that follows an earthquake, when everything looks the same on the surface, but nothing feels steady underneath. Mara sat at the kitchen table, her hands curled around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. The steam was gone, and so was the warmth. She stared down into the cup, unable to look anywhere else. The words Luke had said just hours ago still echoed through her mind, sharp and merciless. "I made a mistake," he'd said. "There's someone else." 4 words. That was all it took to break everything. She had imagined what betrayal might feel like before, in other people's stories, in TV dramas, even in the whispered confessions of her friends. But nothing prepared her for how quiet it was. There was no shouting, no plates thrown, no dramatic scene. Just emptiness, a deep, hollow ache spreading through her chest. Her eyes drifted to the wall, to the framed wedding photo hanging by the kitchen doorway. They had been so young then. She could still remember the way Luke's hand shook as he slid the ring onto her finger, the way his voice caught when he promised to love her through the storms. She had believed him with everything in her. She had built her life around that promise. And now, it was shattered. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't even bother to wipe it away. Somewhere upstairs, she could hear the sound of drawers opening and closing. Luke was packing. The quiet thud of footsteps above made her stomach twist. Every sound was a reminder that he was really leaving. How did they get here? How did 2 people who prayed together every night end up so far apart? She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, to make him feel the pain he'd just unleashed inside her. But she didn't have the energy. The anger was there, simmering beneath the heartbreak, but the weight of sadness pressed heavier. It was the kind of sorrow that made your limbs feel too heavy to move. Her gaze fell again to the photo, the 2 of them beaming under the summer sun, his arm around her waist, her eyes shining with joy. "I thought we were forever," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought we were strong enough." She stood slowly, walked over, and took the photo from the wall. For a long time, she just stared at it. The memory of that day flooded her mind. Her father crying in the front row, her best friend Tessa laughing during the reception, the way Luke had looked at her like she was the only person in the world. That look had once made her feel safe. Now it only hurt. Her hands trembled. Then, with a deep, unsteady breath, she tore the photo in half. The sound of the paper ripping echoed through the kitchen, sharp and final. She expected it to feel satisfying, freeing even, but it didn't. It just made her cry harder. She sank into the chair again, holding the torn halves in her lap. She couldn't throw them away, not yet. They were broken, but they were still hers. Still their story, even if it had ended badly. Mara's thoughts wandered back to God, though she wasn't sure what to say. She had prayed for this marriage, prayed for Luke, prayed for protection. She had trusted that their love was rooted in something sacred. Now she wondered if she'd misunderstood everything. Maybe she hadn't prayed hard enough. Maybe God hadn't been listening. Or maybe he had, and this was the answer she didn't want. "Why, God," she whispered, "why did you let this happen?" Her voice cracked on the last word, her heart splintering under the weight of the question. She looked down again at the torn photo on the table. Two halves of something that used to be whole, something that might never be whole again. Then, slowly, she pushed the pieces side by side. It wasn't perfect. They didn't line up quite right. But at least they were close. For some reason, that small act gave her comfort. Maybe broken things didn't have to stay scattered. Maybe, somehow, God could still work in the pieces. She laid her head on her folded arms and whispered into the silence, "I don't know how to fix this, Lord. I don't even know if I want to. But please, don't leave me here." Outside, a storm rolled in. Rain began to fall against the window, soft but steady. A quiet reminder that even the sky breaks open before it's made new again. The rain hadn't stopped all night. By morning, the sky was still gray. The world outside washed in that strange quiet that comes after a storm. Mara stood in the doorway of what used to be her home, her small suitcase by her feet. Her fingers gripped the handle tightly, but she didn't move. The house felt different now, hollow somehow. Every corner seemed to echo. The family photos still hung on the walls. The scent of Luke's cologne still lingered in the hallway. But everything felt foreign, like she had stepped into someone else's life. She wanted to slam the door, to make some kind of noise that matched the ache inside her chest. But she couldn't. She just whispered, "Goodbye," and pulled the door closed behind her. The drive to Tessa's house blurred together, gray skies, wet roads, and windshield wipers keeping rhythm with her heartbeat. Her best friend opened the door before she even knocked. "Oh, Mara!" That's all Tessa said. No questions, no advice, just a hug that said everything words couldn't. Mara buried her face in Tessa's shoulder and cried, the kind of cry that comes from somewhere deep, where pain lives before it ever finds words. Hours later, she sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the open suitcase at her feet. Clothes folded neatly inside, her toothbrush sticking out of a side pocket, her Bible resting on top, still unread since the night before. She couldn't bring herself to open it. That first night away was the hardest. The unfamiliar room was too quiet, too still. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of the rain against the window, reminded her of what wasn't there. Luke's absence was everywhere, in the way the bed felt too big, in the way she reached out instinctively to the empty side, before pulling her hand back. She sat cross-legged under the blanket and whispered to the ceiling, "God, I don't even know what to pray anymore." Her voice broke, raw from crying. "I did everything right. I prayed, I loved, I tried, and now everything's gone." Her words fell into the darkness and vanished. It felt like God was gone, too. The next morning, Tessa made pancakes. Mara tried to smile, tried to act normal, but her body felt heavy, her mind numb. She pushed food around her plate, pretending to eat. Tessa didn't push her. She just said, "You don't have to figure everything out right now. Just breathe, okay?" One thing at a time, Mara nodded. She wanted to believe it. But breathing felt like the hardest thing in the world. She stepped outside after breakfast, standing on the small porch as the wind brushed against her face. The world kept moving. Birds sang, cars passed by, neighbors waved to each other. Life went on. and she hated that it did, because hers had stopped. That night, she sat by the window with a journal on her lap. She stared at the blank page for a long time before finally writing, God, I don't know where you are. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to forgive. But please, if you're still here, help me find myself again. She stared at the words until they blurred through her tears. Then, slowly, she closed the journal and whispered, maybe I don't have to be strong right now. Maybe it's okay to just be broken outside. The rain started again, soft, steady, familiar. And though her heart still hurt, the rhythm of it felt like something alive. Like maybe God hadn't gone anywhere after all. The rain hadn't stopped all night. By morning, the sky was still gray. The world outside washed in that strange quiet that comes after a storm. Mara stood in the doorway of what used to be her home, her small suitcase by her feet. Her fingers gripped the handle tightly, but she didn't move. The house felt different now, hollow somehow. Every corner seemed to echo. The family photos still hung on the walls. The scent of Luke's cologne still lingered in the hallway. But everything felt foreign, like she had stepped into someone else's life. She wanted to slam the door, to make some kind of noise that matched the ache inside her chest. But she couldn't. She just whispered, "Goodbye," and pulled the door closed behind her. The drive to Tessa's house blurred together, gray skies, wet roads, and windshield wipers keeping rhythm with her heartbeat. Her best friend opened the door before she even knocked. "Oh, Mara!" That's all Tessa said. No questions, no advice, just a hug that said everything words couldn't. Mara buried her face in Tessa's shoulder and cried, the kind of cry that comes from somewhere deep, where pain lives before it ever finds words. Hours later, she sat on the edge of the guest bed, staring at the open suitcase at her feet. Clothes folded neatly inside, her toothbrush sticking out of a side pocket, her Bible resting on top, still unread since the night before. She couldn't bring herself to open it. That first night away was the hardest. The unfamiliar room was too quiet, too still. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of the rain against the window, reminded her of what wasn't there. Luke's absence was everywhere, in the way the bed felt too big, in the way she reached out instinctively to the empty side, before pulling her hand back. She sat cross-legged under the blanket and whispered to the ceiling, God, I don't even know what to pray anymore. Her voice broke, raw from crying. I did everything right. I prayed, I loved, I tried, and now everything's gone. Her words fell into the darkness and vanished. It felt like God was gone, too. The next morning, Tessa made pancakes. Mara tried to smile, tried to act normal, but her body felt heavy, her mind numb. She pushed food around her plate, pretending to eat. Tessa didn't push her. She just said, You don't have to figure everything out right now. Just breathe, okay? One thing at a time, Mara nodded. She wanted to believe it. But breathing felt like the hardest thing in the world. She stepped outside after breakfast, standing on the small porch as the wind brushed against her face. The world kept moving. Birds sang, cars passed by, neighbors waved to each other. Life went on. And she hated that it did, because hers had stopped. That night, she sat by the window with a journal on her lap. She stared at the blank page for a long time before finally writing, God, I don't know where you are. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to forgive. But please, if you're still here, Help me find myself again. She stared at the words until they blurred through her tears. Then, slowly, she closed the journal and whispered, "Maybe I don't have to be strong right now. Maybe it's okay to just be broken outside." The rain started again, soft, steady, familiar, and though her heart still hurt, the rhythm of it felt like something alive, like maybe God hadn't gone anywhere after all. Sunday mornings used to feel sacred to Mara. Now, they just felt complicated. She sat in her car in the church parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. It had taken her 3 weeks to gather the courage to come back. Even now, she wasn't sure she was ready. She could have driven away. She thought about it, twice. But something deeper nudged her to stay. She took a deep breath, whispered a shaky prayer, and stepped out into the cool morning air. The church doors were open, sunlight spilling through the stained glass. The familiar scent of coffee and hymnals wrapped around her as she walked inside. It should have been comforting, but instead, her chest tightened. Memories rushed in. Luke's hand in hers during worship, the way he'd smile at her across the pews, the way they used to pray together before service started. Now she walked alone. She found a seat near the back, far from where they used to sit. The music began, soft and warm, voices rising in praise. She tried to sing, but her throat refused to cooperate. The words of the hymn, "Great is thy faithfulness," felt too heavy to say out loud. So she stood in silence, her eyes closed, tears forming before she could stop them. Across the room, Luke sat in the very last row. He hadn't planned on coming either. He almost didn't. But when he woke that morning, something pressed on his heart, a pull he couldn't ignore. He didn't expect to see her there. Not yet. And when he did, his breath caught. Mara. She stood with her head bowed, her eyes closed, tears slipping quietly down her face. The sight broke him all over again. He wanted to go to her, to fall at her feet and apologize. But he knew this wasn't his moment to speak. This was her moment to stand, to find God again in the ruins he'd helped create. So he stayed still, hands clasped in front of him, whispering his own prayer. "Please, God, meet her here, heal what I broke." The pastor stepped up to the pulpit, his voice calm and kind. "Today's message," he began, "is about grace. Not the easy kind we talk about when life is fine, but the kind that finds us when we've messed up, when we've been hurt, when forgiveness feels impossible." Mara felt her heart twist. The words landed too close. She tried to tune him out, but it was no use. Every sentence seemed written for her. "Grace," he said, "isn't about forgetting the wrong. It's about letting go of the right to carry bitterness, because bitterness only chains the wounded, never the guilty." Her breath hitched. She could almost feel God leaning in, whispering gently, "This is for you." And for the first time, she didn't fight the tears. When the service ended, she stayed seated, hoping to slip out after the crowd left. But then she felt it, that quiet awareness that she wasn't alone. She looked up. Luke stood a few pews away, hands in his pockets, unsure if he should speak. His eyes were swollen from crying. He looked smaller somehow, humbled, human, fragile. They just stared at each other for a long moment. No words, no explanations. Just the heavy, complicated silence of two people bound by pain and something deeper they couldn't yet name. Finally, Mara whispered, "I didn't expect to see you here." Luke nodded slowly. "I didn't expect to see you either." He hesitated, then said softly, "I'm not here to talk. I just wanted to worship and to pray for you." Something in his voice broke her guard, not because it fixed anything, but because it was honest. She nodded once, her eyes filling again. Then, "Maybe that's enough for now." He gave a faint smile, the kind that carried both sorrow and gratitude, then turned to leave. Mara watched him go. For the first time, his presence didn't make her angry. It just made her ache. And somewhere deep down, beneath the wreckage of everything they'd lost, she felt the faintest stir of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the beginning of grace. The coffee shop was quiet that afternoon, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel louder than it is. Mara sat near the window, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. She had almost canceled. Twice. When Luke had asked to meet, her first instinct was to say no. But something in her heart, that same small, persistent nudge that had led her back to church, had whispered, "Go anyway." The bell above the door chimed. She looked up, and there he was. Luke paused for a moment when he saw her, like he needed to steady himself before walking over. His eyes were tired, the kind of tired that comes from sleepless nights and heavy regrets. "Hey," he said softly. Mara nodded. "Hey." He sat down slowly, leaving a cautious space between them. The silence stretched. The air between them was thick with everything unspoken, words they were afraid to say, truths they couldn't avoid. Finally, Mara broke the silence. "Why now, Luke?" "Why did you want to talk?" He exhaled, his gaze dropping to the table. "Because I needed to. Because you deserve more than the way I left things. You deserve the truth." She waited, her expression guarded. He looked up at her, eyes glistening. "There's not a day that goes by that I don't regret what I did. I don't have excuses. I was selfish, lost, angry at myself, at God, at everything. But none of that justifies the pain I caused you." Mara's throat tightened. She hadn't expected him to be so direct. He continued, his voice trembling. "After you left, I thought I'd ruined everything, and I had. But I started praying again. For the first time in years, I didn't ask God to fix things. I just asked him to change me." Her eyes flickered, softening slightly. Luke went on, quieter now. "I've been in counseling, talking to my pastor. I'm learning what it means to rebuild from the ground up. Not for us, not because I think you owe me another chance, but because I can't live the way I was living anymore. I need to be right with God, even if I never get to be right with you." The honesty in his voice hit something deep inside her. She swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Luke said immediately, "and I'm not asking you to." "Not yet. I just needed to say I'm sorry, and that I understand if that doesn't fix anything." Mara stared down at her coffee, tracing her finger along the rim. "You broke something in me, Luke." "Something I don't even know how to name, I know," he said softly. "And I hate that I did." There was another long silence. This time, it wasn't suffocating, just heavy, like they were both letting the truth hang in the space where lies used to live. Finally, Mara looked up. "You said you've been praying." "What for?" He smiled faintly. "For you. For healing, for grace, for the strength to accept whatever God decides for us, even if it means letting go." Tears welled in her eyes. "That's different," she admitted. "You never used to talk like that." "I never used to listen like this," he said quietly. The waitress came by to refill their cups, and both of them murmured polite thank yous, though neither touched their drinks. When she left, Mara took a deep breath. "I don't know what happens next," she said honestly. "I don't even know if I want there to be a next. But I think this conversation was needed." Luke nodded. "That's enough for me." He stood, hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "You don't owe me anything, Mara. But thank you for meeting me. Really." As he walked out, Mara sat still, tears blurring her vision. For the first time, she didn't feel rage. She didn't feel numbness either. She just felt tired, but lighter somehow, as if a small hidden door inside her heart had opened. Just a crack, letting the first light of forgiveness begin to slip through. Spring came quietly. The world outside seemed to be healing faster than Mara did. Trees sprouting green, birds returning, life moving forward as if nothing had been broken. But inside, something small was beginning to stir in her too. It had been 2 months since that coffee shop conversation. Mara still wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she felt peace about not knowing. She'd stopped checking Luke's social media, stopped replaying their past, stopped trying to make sense of what didn't. Instead, she focused on breathing again. Every morning, she'd walk the small trail behind Tessa's neighborhood, letting the quiet whisper to her soul. She started praying again, too. Not the desperate, tear-soaked prayers she used to cry out in the dark, but gentle ones, honest ones. "God, I'm still hurting," she'd whisper as she walked, "but thank you that I'm still here." Her prayers became less about the pain and more about the process. One Sunday after service, her pastor announced a new small group, Healing Through Faith. It sounded too on the nose, but something in her heart said go. The first meeting felt awkward. She wasn't used to talking about her marriage in front of strangers. But as the weeks went on, she found herself opening up, not just about Luke, but about her anger toward God, her loneliness, her doubts. There was a woman in the group named Ruth who had lost her husband years ago. One evening, Ruth said something that stuck with her. Forgiveness isn't pretending the wound never happened. It's choosing to let God heal it instead of you trying to fix it yourself. Mara went home that night and wrote the words in her journal. Let God heal it. Meanwhile, Luke had his own journey unfolding quietly. He'd joined a men's group at church, something he never would have done before. The first night, he barely spoke. He just listened as other men shared their stories of failure, pride, redemption. When it came his turn, he finally said it out loud. I cheated. I broke my vows. And I'm trying to become someone who never would again. The room didn't judge him. They prayed for him. And for the first time, Luke realized that grace wasn't a concept. It was a community. Weeks passed, and one evening, after small group, Mara walked out of the church and nearly ran into Luke in the parking lot. They both froze. Hey, he said, a little breathless. She smiled faintly. Hey, you're in Ruth's group? He asked, almost shyly. She nodded. And you? He scratched the back of his neck. Men's group, trying to unlearn a few bad habits. For the first time, she laughed softly. That's good, Luke. He smiled, his eyes warm. You seem different. Lighter, she nodded. I think I'm finally starting to let God carry it. They stood there for a moment, not as husband and wife, not as broken and betrayed, just two people walking their own paths toward grace. Before she left, Luke said quietly, I'm proud of you, Mara. She didn't cry. She didn't freeze. She just smiled and said, "Thanks." And for the first time, it didn't hurt to say goodbye. That night, she opened her journal and wrote, "Healing isn't fast. It isn't clean. But maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe God doesn't rush the things He wants to last." She closed the book and looked out the window. The moonlight spilled gently across the pages, soft and forgiving. And for the first time since everything fell apart, Mara whispered, "Thank you, God, for the cracks. They're where the light gets in." The morning sun poured softly through the blinds of Luke's small apartment. His Bible sat open on the table beside a half-empty cup of coffee, and a stack of crumpled papers lay scattered across the surface. He'd been writing all night. Every time he tried to find the right words, they came out wrong. Too small, too careful, too safe. But tonight, he wasn't trying to sound right anymore. He was just trying to be honest. Luke stared at the blank page in front of him and whispered a quiet prayer. "God, if there's anything left to say, let it be yours." Then, slowly, he began to write. "Mara, if you're reading this, it's because I finally found the courage to send it. I've written 100 versions of this letter, and none of them felt enough. Maybe they never will. But this one isn't about fixing what I broke. It's about finally owning what I did, and thanking God for what He's done since. When you left, I thought my life was over. But now I see that maybe it needed to end. At least, the version of me that thought he could live without truth, without integrity, without grace. I hurt you. I betrayed the vows we made before God, and no amount of apology will erase that. But I want you to know this. I'm not the same man who made those choices. God's been breaking me down, in the best way. He's shown me that repentance isn't a performance. It's a posture. It's not crying because you got caught. It's crying because you finally understand what your sin cost someone else. I've spent nights on my knees asking Him to heal you, to give you peace, even if that peace doesn't include me. I still wear my ring, not as a symbol of what we were, but as a reminder of the promise I broke and the grace I didn't deserve but still received. I don't know what your heart holds now, Mara. Maybe anger, maybe healing, maybe both. But if this letter does anything, I hope it reminds you that God can redeem even the darkest chapters. I'm praying that He continues to make us both new, wherever life leads. With grace, Luke. He set the pen down and exhaled slowly, his shoulders trembling under the weight of it. For a long time, he just stared at the letter, pages full of truth, lined with tears. He didn't expect her to respond. He didn't even know if she'd read it. But he felt peace, for the first time in a long while. It wasn't closure. It was surrender. That evening, he slipped the letter into an envelope, wrote her name in careful cursive, and left it at the church mailbox where she volunteered on Tuesdays. Then he walked to the nearby park and sat on the same bench where he'd first prayed for forgiveness months ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and rose. He whispered a quiet prayer. God, whatever happens next, thank you. Thank you for letting me fall, so you could teach me how to kneel. The next day, Mara found the letter. She was organizing flyers in the church office when she noticed it. Her name, written in familiar handwriting. Her stomach knotted. For a long time, she just held it, unsure if she was ready to open it. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, finally won. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to read. With every word, her walls softened a little more. By the time she reached the end, her hands were shaking. Tears blurred her vision, but they weren't the same tears as before. They weren't heavy or bitter. They were gentle, honest, healing. She folded the letter carefully and held it to her chest. And for the first time, she whispered his name, not in anger, but in prayer. Thank you, God, for what you're doing in both of us. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew this. God was writing something new, and it was good. The air smelled like rain that morning, clean and new, the kind of scent that carries the promise of spring. Mara stood at the edge of the driveway, her hand resting on the handle of her suitcase. The past few months had been slow unfolding, not a straight path, but a winding one. Healing never is. Now she was back, not to move in, not to reclaim what was lost, but to close the chapter with peace in her heart. The house looked smaller somehow, or maybe she had just grown. Luke opened the door before she could knock. He looked startled, then unsure, like he didn't know what to say. His hair was a little longer, his face softer. He didn't carry the same heaviness anymore. "Mara," he said quietly. "Hey," she replied, her voice calm, steady. They stood in silence for a long moment, two people who had traveled through the same storm and somehow made it to the other side. "I came to pick up the rest of my things," she said gently. He nodded. "Of course. I packed up what was left. They're in the guest room." As she stepped inside, memories met her like echoes. Laughter, arguments, the smell of burnt toast from Saturday mornings. For a second, she almost couldn't breathe. But then, she whispered a prayer under her breath. "God, help me see this not as what I lost, but what you've restored in me." She walked through the room slowly, touching the walls, the picture frames, the worn edges of furniture they'd once picked out together. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. In the kitchen, the light hit the table just right, the same table where everything had fallen apart. She ran her fingers along the surface and felt the faint groove of a scratch Luke had once promised to fix. He came to stand in the doorway. "I never did fix that," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "Some things aren't meant to be fixed. Just forgiven." Luke nodded, his eyes wet. "You read the letter?" "I did," she said. "It was honest." "And healing," he swallowed hard. "I meant every word." "I know." They stood in silence again, not the bitter kind that used to fill their home, but something gentler. Finally, Mara reached into her bag and pulled something out. It was the torn wedding photo, the one she hadn't been able to throw away. Luke froze when he saw it. She placed it on the table, the two halves carefully taped together. The tear still visible, the lines imperfect, but held. "It's not perfect," she said softly, "but maybe that's the point." Luke blinked back tears. "It's beautiful." She smiled, a real smile this time. "We're both different now." "Maybe that's enough." He took a slow step closer, cautious, reverent. "Mara, I don't want to assume anything, but if there's ever a day when you think we could start again, even just as friends, I'd be grateful for that chance." She looked at him, her heart steady. "Maybe one day, Luke. But for now, I think God's still writing our stories separately." He nodded, his expression peaceful. "That's okay. I'll keep praying. For you, for me, for whatever he has planned." She smiled again. "That's all I could ever ask." Outside, the sky broke open, sunlight spilling across the grass in golden streaks. Mara walked toward her car, the suitcase rolling quietly behind her. When she reached the end of the driveway, she turned back. Luke stood at the doorway, watching her with gratitude instead of regret. She lifted her hand in a small wave, and he returned it. As she drove away, she felt something deep inside her finally exhale, not because everything was fixed, but because she was free. Sometimes love isn't restored by returning to what was, but by letting God make something new out of what's been broken. Because when grace holds the pieces, even shattered promises can still reflect His light. She thought her marriage was over. The vows were broken, the trust shattered, and her faith hanging by a thread. But what if the end of her story was actually the beginning of grace? This is the story of Mara and Luke, of promises broken, hearts mended, and a God who restores even what we think is beyond repair.